Welcome back. This is the second video of our series here using non-religious, mainstream, secular science to prove that a God must exist. Today we're doing the origin of life and evolution. Still got La La Land up here, blind faith. I'm going to show you where Darwinists and atheists and people who believe in evolution are building their whole theory on blind faith. Over here I've got the original evidence from the last video of the cosmological argument that we did. Just a brief recap. I showed that space, matter, and time had a beginning, and that the universe itself is fine-tuned. So if space, matter, and time had a beginning, whatever caused space, matter, and time must be spaceless, immaterial, timeless, or eternal. If it's fine-tuned, it requires intelligence, and the being must be personal because it chose to create. If you got any questions on that, go back to the last video, and I'll answer all those questions that you probably have. Today's video, this is the premise and conclusion of the evidence that we see. Number one, information always has an intelligent source. That we don't see information coming from blind, undirected processes in nature. Number two, the first cell requires information inside of it. I'm going to get into this. Number three, therefore, first life, or the first cell, requires intelligence to create it. That life could not have popped into existence because of the evidence that we see. So what is the evidence that we see? Here's the tree of evolution. And you guys, this is a horrible rendering, I know. There's a lot of things that are factual. My terrible handwriting and drawings are one of them. This is the tree of evolution. All these black boxes are different layers of evidence I'm going to get into. I decided today we're just going to go right here at the trunk of it. We're going to cut the whole tree down. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the branches. These branches are essentially different life forms, different species that spread out throughout the theory of evolution, or so it goes. First layer of information we have, remember I talked about information always has an intelligent source. This is a digital code. This is what computers use. It's called a binary code. Binary meaning two. It has two outputs, zeros and ones. If you've ever seen like the computer screens of all the zeros and ones, that's what a lot of computer code looks like at its very deepest source. This, A, T, C, and G, is a quaternary code. Rather than binary, it's quaternary. This is your genetic code. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. I'm saying those right. This is just kind of showing how it repeats. Our genetic code is over 1 billion letters or sequences long on the double helix DNA molecule. Watson and Crick in 1953 were doing all kinds of research into DNA, and they could not figure out what was this ATCG in this weird order just keep on going for billions of letters long. They couldn't figure out what is the purpose of these things. And then it struck them, they realized this is a code, this is a language, this is a message actually laid into your DNA. And they realized this and they were baffled. It was one of the biggest discoveries, probably one of the best discoveries of that century. People's colloquial definition of DNA, or their understanding at least, is like, well, it's just kind of a serial number that every person has a little bit different one. While that's partially true, it's far more than that. Your DNA is what tells your cells how to function. Your DNA is in the nucleus of every cell. Without DNA, your body would not know how to make or code proteins. So this brings us to the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis basically says that all life comes from pre-existing life, that all cells come from a pre-existing cell, which tells you right there that life popping into existence out of nothing, which is the primordial soup theory that evolutionists and Darwinists put forward, is absurd, because you need an information code inside the cell. You don't get millions of years or billions of years to create this information code. You need it at the very first life. Because in order to create protein, you need DNA and the code inside of it. And in order to get DNA and the code inside of it, you need protein. That brings us here to this chicken and the egg, but we have protein and DNA. See, the very first cell would be made of protein. But scientists can't even make protein from inorganic materials. When you look at the periodic table of elements, that's the ingredient list of the universe and the world that we live in. Scientists have tried over and over again to create a single living cell from inorganic material. They've always failed. They can't even create a single protein from inorganic materials. So if we can't even through an intelligent process, through laboratories and instruments and research, creating the perfect environments possible to create life, adding in just the right amounts of carbon, just the amounts of right of water, and everything. With an intelligent process, we can't create life. But we're supposed to believe that an unintelligent, blind, undirected process can? It seems unreasonable, and it goes against objective observational science. We can't do it, even with intelligence. So here's the problem that scientists can't break. They cannot put intelligence into the cell. They can't even create a cell, let alone a protein. So you need DNA and the code inside of it to make protein. And you need protein to make a cell, which holds DNA. It's very similar to the chicken and the egg problem, but you don't get millions of years or billions of years. It had to be that way from the beginning. This digital code is written just as like computer is, and our DNA actually is the most sophisticated and advanced storage communication system in the world. Right now in 2019, scientists and researchers are racing, Microsoft, they're trying to make actual hard drives and storage systems made of DNA because it's so advanced, it's so much better than what we have as far as hard drives, flash drives, CDs, cassette tapes. That's how we advance throughout time, creating information storage systems. DNA is so far beyond anything we have. Believe it or not, inside of every one of your cells is about 1.5 gigabytes of information. If you add up your whole body together, you'll have about 150 trillion gigabytes of information. It's probably more information than ever existed in about 2011 or 2012. Now we have a whole lot more information. So we've outpaced our body as far as a hard drive and as raw storage would go. So the problem then, we can't create DNA without protein, can't create protein without DNA. We see that the data storage system is more advanced than anything we've ever created, and scientists are now trying to use DNA. And yet, we're to believe that an undirected blind process created that? It seems absurd to me. So, I'm going to read a quote to you by Stuart Kauffman. He's a biologist, and he's an atheist, and he's known for his self-organization theories regarding the origin of life. He admits anyone who tells you that he or she knows how life started on the earth some 3.45 billion years ago is a fool or a knave. Period. Nobody knows. This Darwinist will claim that there was a primordial soup where there was inorganic chemicals in a pond or a mud puddle, and maybe lightning hit the mud puddle and it turned into cells, which then turned in eventually to man. So the mud puddle to man theory requires intelligence. It requires information. And so that's the gist of the argument here as far as the origin of life. There's also other layers of information like irreducibly complex structures. What does this mean? I'm going to read for you what Darwin himself wrote when he wrote The Origin of Species. He says, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So what he's saying here is, if something could not be constructed or built by the mechanics of evolution, being random mutation or natural selection, then his theory would break down. Well, we have irreducibly complex structures, such as the flagellum motor. I've included a mousetrap because it's a good analogy. So the mousetrap, you have the spring, you have the hammer, you have the trip plate, and then you have the wire that goes over, and then the board. You can't remove any part of the mousetrap assembly and have it still function as a mousetrap. The flagellum motor is probably one of the most amazing biological discoveries that I've ever seen. I'm going to cut out to a video that shows you a little bit more about it because I'll do a horrible job explaining what's going on here, but it's incredible. Check it out.
Black Box in 1996. Behe spotlighted and made famous a number of really interesting discoveries that had been occurring in biochemistry and cell biology over the last 2 or 3 decades. And what biologists, molecular biologists, cell biologists, microbiologists have been discovering is that at the level of individual cells, there are little tiny examples of nanotechnology, little tiny machines at work. The flagellar motor is the one that Behe made most famous. It's a rotary engine that powers a whip-like tail, a protein tail that functions like a propeller, and it moves the bacterium through liquid enabling the bacterium to essentially track down its food supply. And this little machine includes a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a U-joint, bushings, bearings, and a whip-like tail that functions like a propeller. And the machine in some bacterial systems turns at 100,000 RPMs in one direction and can reverse direction on a quarter of a turn and turn 100,000 RPM in the other direction.
Bacterial flagellum is a true nanomachine, about 40 nanometers in size. It's amazing. I mean, E. coli, salmonella, which are kind of our model systems for the bacterial flagellum, can propel the cell about 20 lengths per second through a very viscous medium, like water, to these organisms. And you extrapolate that to human scale. 20 body lengths per second, 6-foot person, times 20, 120 feet per second. Mark Spitz or Phelps would be setting records with this type of propulsion.
It's hardwired into a signal transduction circuit that allows the bacterium to sense changes in the sugar gradient in the surrounding liquid.
This signal transduction system is actually a short-term memory system where the cell is, if it's going in the direction of an attractant, a nutrient that it can use to metabolize, it follows that chemical gradient. If it's a repellent, it will sense that and move in the opposite direction. So it's more than just this engine.
It's an extraordinary piece of nanotechnology. It's high-tech in low life. And so just by spotlighting these extraordinary pieces of nanotechnology inside cells, and the flagellar motor wasn't the only one by any means, Behe, in a sense, opened up a window for people. He opened up the black box of the inner workings of the cell and said, look, this is much more complex than anything that the early evolutionary biologists had envisioned. Darwin knew nothing of this type of nanotechnology in cells, and at the very least, we've got to come up with an explanation for this.
So what an amazing video and an amazing discovery. This flagella motor, they didn't tell you this in the video, but it runs at about 98 to 99% efficiency. For those of you who don't understand what that really means, our gasoline engines that we have, despite all the research and development and billions of dollars they've put in trying to get the best miles per gallon on a vehicle, we're at around 25 to 30% efficiency through gasoline engines. This thing's running at 98 to 99%, meaning every bit of energy that goes into that motor comes out as propulsion. Every bit of energy that you put into your vehicle, 25 to 30% of your gasoline, is actually being used to move your car forward. The other 65 and 70% are lost through heat, friction, mechanical losses, and unburned fuel coming out of the exhaust. We, through intelligent processes and billions of dollars of research, can't get to the efficiency level that this motor is operating at. But yet we're led to believe that an unintelligent process created it. But that's not even the biggest point. It's irreducibly complex. And what that means is I can't remove any certain part of the assembly and lose complete function. If I remove the drive shaft from the flagella motor, it no longer swims. It's no longer functional. If I remove the tail, it no longer swims. If I remove the stator, or if I remove the rotor, or if I remove the universal joint, or if I remove the bearings, I can't remove any part and still have any function. Again, let me read this for you. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. This is Charles Darwin, the founder of Darwinism's own admission that we found that evidence. When he wrote this, it was in the 1800s. They didn't have a real understanding of the cells or biology or microbiology. They didn't know that there was like nanotechnology inside of our cells in super complex systems along with information. I'm not beating on Darwin, but I'm saying here, under Darwin's own admission, his theory does not have a mechanism to explain an irreducibly complex structure. I can't create a flagella motor through serious little steps and still have it function. It's impossible. And that's why I conclude the mousetrap. You can't have a mousetrap that functions without all of the assembly of the mousetrap there. This basically concludes the video. I'm going to show you Richard Dawkins, not Charles Darwin, Richard Dawkins. He's the atheist. I'm going to show you where he uses blind faith, but he actually accepts this evidence. And you're going to see Richard Dawkins, I'm going to spoil it for you, but I'm going to tell you up front. He says that the digital code is just like a computer, it's copy-pasted just like a computer, and that he believes that there could be aliens who seeded life here before we were fully developed humans. And so this alien race came to Earth and seeded life on Earth because he, number one, acknowledges that it requires intelligence to get the life that we have here today. But the problem is that kicks the step one step back. So now we got to say, okay, well, what created the aliens? Where'd they come from? And then he'll actually go even further on the blind faith limb. I mean, he's way out there already saying aliens put us here because he has no evidence for it. But he's going to tell you that the aliens themselves must have come about through some kind of Darwinism mechanism or some Darwinist mechanism of evolution. So now, yes, it requires intelligence to make humans or any life on Earth that we see. But the aliens who put us here, they came about through evolution. And that's a more reasonable position than to acknowledge that it requires an intelligent being to create life. Now, this does not necessarily mean the God of the Bible is the one who did it. It requires additional evidence to get there. But when you couple this evidence here with this evidence here from the last video, you start seeing, okay, a spaceless, immaterial, eternal, intelligent, personal being is what created the universe. And we see an intelligent being must have created us. Could it be the same being? I think that's a pretty reasonable inference to make. Because see, all language, all messages, all information is actually immaterial. This is written with ink, right? It's being expressed in a physical way. I'm using matter, ink, to express this code. But the code itself, the information itself is immaterial. To break over to the immaterial realm, you need a mind. See, our brains are physical, they're matter. Our brains are matter, but our mind transcends into the immaterial or metaphysical. All language, any word up here you want to pick, the meaning of the word structures is a physical thing, but the word itself, the information here, the message is not. The same is true if you were walking along the beach and you see written in the sand, Andrew Bench talks too much. Regardless if it's true or not, and it's probably true, you wouldn't think, oh, well, maybe the waves and the wind kind of just hit the sand just right and made that message. It's an immaterial message. It's expressed with matter. It's expressed in the sand. You're just arranging the sand. But the message transcends and it's immaterial. This is why we can't get a genetic code that comes from blind, undirected physical processes. The same inference you would make when you see something written in the sand is the same inference that an intelligent mind must be out there. This is the same thing that they do with those radio telescopes that are listening to outer space. We're listening for a message. We're listening for some kind of signal that would indicate intelligent life. And if they receive any message at all, it's going to be headlines. Oh, there's intelligent life out there. But here's a message right here in our cells, and they ignore it. They ignore it. They're not willing to come to terms with the information because it lets God's foot in the door. And I'm telling you, they'd rather believe in blind faith. So check out this video here I've got. It's Richard Dawkins, and then we'll come right back.
Biology, I suppose it would have to be the double helix, Watson and Crick discovery of the structure of DNA, which was far more than just the discovery, the crystallographic work, discovering the structure of a big molecule. Because what that led up to was a major revolution in which much of biology became a sort of branch of information technology. The consequence of the Watson-Crick discovery, with all that it led on to, the DNA code and the sort of various genome projects that are going on now, is that genes, which from my point of view are absolutely central to biology, genes are information. They are coded information it even looks like computer information. I mean, a chromosome is a great long computer tape. It's linear, it runs one-dimensional, digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary, but apart from that, it's just the same as computer tape. It's read in sequence. It's copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste. So biology has turned into computer science.
Create the heavens and the earth.
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Here's the trunk of the tree. This black line shows life coming into existence out of nothing. I've already demonstrated it's not actually possible for that to happen. The point here is this: information always has an intelligent source. We saw Richard Dawkins acknowledge that when he was able to entertain the idea of aliens being the intelligent source of the information that we see inside of ourselves. First, life requires intelligence. He understands this. He grasps this. He acknowledges it. But it's almost like a child. You know, like, they already have a preconceived notion. Well, I know it can't be God, but I need intelligence. But it can't be human. Well, what's that really narrow it down to? Aliens. You can follow his thought logic. You know it's based on blind faith. You know it's la la land. I'm not trying to tell you what to believe. I'm just showing you guys the evidence, and if you follow the evidence where it takes you, with an open mind, you'll come to the conclusion, well, this universe must have had an intelligent being that created it. And life itself must have had an intelligent being that created it. And there's a good chance, it's a good inference to make that they're probably the same being. I'll continue to do more videos like this with more evidence. One last thing. I said I really wouldn't get into the branches here, right? When a woman is born, I'm going to kind of, because some people think, well, what about all the rest of the evolution? What about the rest of that theory? Okay, maybe we just don't know. It's not that we don't know. We're not inserting God where we don't know how life started. We're saying it requires intelligence. That's not a God of the gaps argument. God of the gaps argument goes like this. At one time, religious people said, well, that thunder and that lightning must have come about from God because we don't have a natural explanation for it, so we're going to invoke the supernatural. This isn't that case. We're saying we see what it requires. We see it requires intelligence. It must be spaceless, immaterial, eternal, intelligent, personal. If you've seen the last video, you don't have to call him God. Give him any name you want. But that's what we mean when we say God. But when a woman is born, she has all of her reproductive cells already, her eggs. women, you know this, you only get one chance, you only got so much ammo and you run out. I was born in 1994. The egg that I came from, which was once half my genetic code, was actually built and designed and came into existence in 1963. That would be when my mom was born. While you're still a fetus, a female develops all of her eggs, and her eggs remain unchanged. So where am I going with this? It means that any adaptations that my mom may have went through or didn't, any evolution, whatever, would not have got passed on to me. Because the genetic material that I came from was made before her adaptations ever occurred. And the same is true for her mom, and her mom, and her mom, and her mom. Scientists have now traced the mitochondrial DNA. It's the genetic code of the mitochondria of the cell. It only comes through the maternal lineage. It only comes from the mom's side. And they've realized through studying everyone's mitochondrial DNA that we have all the same mother. That we all have a common ancestor, they think like 200,000 years ago. And we all came from the same woman. This was discovered in the last couple of years. I just remember reading it in the news. I was like, that looks like the story of Adam and Eve to me. I don't know. I might be speaking beyond what the evidence shows, but the evidence says we all have the same mom. It didn't say anything about the dad, but hey, that's still evidence that we should actually acknowledge and come to terms with. So if we have 23 chromosomes from the mom, 23 from the father, it makes 46. Monkeys have like, I can't remember how many, 50 or 60 something. The problem why monkeys and humans can't mate is because the chromosome counts are different. There has to be 23 and 23 coming together to make a human being. Now, knowing what we know about the eggs not changing, that my genetic material came from 1963, even though I was born in 1994, knowing that, we know we can't jump a chromosome count. It's impossible. It's illogical and it's impossible. We've never examined it. We've never seen it. We have tried with dogs. Look, we took wolves, we domesticated them, we breed them, selectively breeding them using an intelligent process to get all kinds of crazy different dogs. You got chihuahuas, pugs, wolves, a little bit of everything. But at the end of the day, they're all still dogs. You can still mate them all together. There's genetic limits. We cannot break that barrier through intelligent processes of selectively breeding them. We've done thousands and thousands of generations of dogs, and we still can't break that genetic barrier. We still can't change their species. So in a way, it's been tried, and it's failed. And nobody can answer where life came from. So why should I entertain the rest of this when there's plenty of evidence that goes against it, including the irreducibly complex structures? Take a look at the human eye or the bones. Our brains are like supercomputers. There's 1,000 trillion electrical connections in your brain. There's more electrical connections that probably exists in the whole world, in your brain. Our bones have a higher strength to weight ratio than steel. And it takes a lot of complex machinery and understanding to make steel. We can make carbon fiber, it's a little bit stronger than bones, but our bones, which came about through a blind, undirected process, have a stronger strength to weight ratio than steel. Our eyes are far more advanced and use a whole lot less energy than most modern cameras do today. There's too many things that give evidence to design rather than chance. And I don't think we should entertain things based on blind faith. I don't think you should either. So thanks for watching. You're welcome to like it, comment, share. If you got questions or objections on this stuff, put them in the comments. I'll answer them as I get to them. We're going to do some more videos on this sort of thing. Next, we're going to do, these last two videos were based on science, scientific evidence. The next one we're going to do is more of a philosophical discussion or a philosophical argument about morality. It'll be a pretty interesting video. I hope you guys stick around and watch. And then we're going to start looking at, is Christianity true? You know, we see there must be an intelligent personal being. Is it this? Is it the God of the Bible? How do I know it's not the Jewish God or the Muslim God, or, well, the Jewish God is really the same God. It's just Judaism, or it is incomplete Christianity in my view, but could be the Hindu gods. I mean, there's so many gods. How do we know which one it is? Is there anything that tells us that the God of the Bible is true? Is there any objective evidence for that? I'm going to get into this. Appreciate you guys watching. Stick around, and I'm going to have some more videos for you guys. Thanks.